Let us begin by defining the Great Divide. This is something that's already beginning to happen, but it will become more and more pronounced. We are separating those of us who are aware, to some extent, from the mass consciousness. It's a progression, but it will reach a point where it becomes far more extreme. And that is when we move deeper into the frequency that Thoth is defining as the pyramidus radius matrix. The deeper we move into that frequency that embraces us into the new earth consciousness, even though we aren't in the new earth yet, the greater the divide will be between us and the mass consciousness. And when I say us, it's not some elite group of people, I want to stress. It is those who choose to be aware. Not perfect, not aware of everything, but aware. And stepping up and saying, I am present for this experience. And yet we can move further into understanding the Great Divide when it reaches the climax of LP 40, Light Principle 40, that Thoth has been speaking to me about since the 1970s. And that is the point when we have a flash and move from a world system 1, entropy, to a world system 2, syntropy. Now I have videos on all of this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing it, but I just wish to set the stage for what I do want to talk about here in this video. There is a deeper aspect of the Great Divide that I will be speaking about a little later, but I want to begin with something else right now. First, some definitions from a Thothic perspective. Let us begin with mass consciousness. We think we pretty much understand that, but let me go over it again from the Thothic view. The thoughts and feelings, emotions of the masses form sort of a tangled web in the etheric state. And this web is also connected and feeds into the lower or lesser akasha. I have a video on that as well. So this lesser akasha is building with all this information, and some of it is very valid, but a lot of it is fear-based and darkly tinted, with those fears, and very vulnerable to psychic intrusion and what we call the archonic cloud, the virus, the nebula virus, not nebula, it's the plasma virus that infiltrates our domain and attaches to fear, anger, frustration, despair, all of these things. So mass consciousness is a mixed bag. It has some good things in it, but it also has this fear-based reality that's very vulnerable to manipulation. Next, we go to the conscious collective. Now, this is a Thothic term, the conscious collective. And in his viewpoint, or the viewpoint of this higher intelligence, it represents conscious awareness on various levels that come together to form a basis for spiritual evolution. In our current civilization, the conscious collective has been rather disorganized as well, not so much as the mass consciousness, but it's been kind of isolating itself in little pieces, fractures of the whole. And now the time is right for it to come together, to become more cohesive and more of a spiritual font for true north, the point where we can gather and represent the higher spiritual principles, the core state of our true reality that we wish to create and are creating, that will become in the world system 2, what we are calling here the new Earth star. I refer you here to my video, The Life Pulse, that gives a basic understanding of the organization of the individual and the collective in this connection to the pulsing frequency that brings us together, brings our informal selves into a formal body of coherence. Where I'm proceeding with this topic is how we understand the nature of our reality and our way of thinking and feeling and being. This is changing, and we are now on the precipice of deciding the path we are going to take and how we are going to represent our spiritual harmony in the coming years. I'm not speaking of in the new Earth Star, but in these coming years before us, and indeed in this present moment. There has been a long time coming on the final stages in a great plan by the One World Legion, the OWL, as Thoth calls them, often called the elite in the outer world, one world order and all of those things. And they have implemented it now. Off and on, they certainly have been for a long time, but with the whole infection thing, that was the start of this final path leading to a new beginning for them. So it's not final like in final, but it is a final path to get us where they want us for the rest of the experience they wish us to have. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that because, again, I have it in the Reality War series that you can find on this channel, and also in a condensed form written in my Substack on the One World Legion. But I need to mention it because it's very much a part of what I want to talk about here from a different perspective. The mass consciousness is currently being conditioned by the OWL to think about things differently, to experience emotions differently, and to process their fears and what kind of fears are really scary into their field. It's like shifting the whole paradigm of how we process reality and our emotions, especially our fears. It's a conditioning platform. This deliberate orchestration revolves around allowing us to see them partially, only partially, but enough that we think we know what we're dealing with. And it's scary to us. We feel disempowered, and yet we also feel like we have to rally somehow to fight this enemy, to reclaim our spiritual right. This is all a part of their plan, because they're not revealing the whole story. They're just saying a certain part of the quiet sentence out loud, and the rest is still very hidden from us. They do this because they want us to run into the arms of something safe. And when we are good and scared, and we see all the awful things they are really doing, we're going to be so ready for comfort, for some safe harbor. And that is when they pull out that final card. And they say, here we are. You have nothing to fear. We're here to protect you. But who's really here to protect us? Only ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean we have a great deal of help from a light network, from the beings of light. And I'm going to be talking about that in just a moment. But you see, they don't spoon feed us. The good parent lets the child make a certain amount of mistakes in life. They don't keep them from learning through a process of cause and effect. And so the beings that are guardians for us, that are helpmates, they cannot interfere with our process. And yet, when we are ready to receive from them, they are there to assist us. So before we continue with the plans of the owl and their safe harbor, let us look at our true companions in light, just briefly. Of course, you've heard me speak of them before, but I'm just going over these things because there are always new people that haven't heard any of this before that are coming across this video. And it's good just to kind of recollect it. There are the star kindred, the ultra-terrestrials that contain the same genetics we do, slightly different, of course, but in variations. But it's the basic core plan genetics. It's the basic template for humanity, Adam Kadmon, with variations. And they are highly spiritual and connected to us through the eons of time. They are the ones who helped create this world as a shining light vessel in the original time. Now, there are other beings that are related to us, but that have broken with that dimension, with that unimanity pact among equilibrium worlds, as Thoth calls it. An example of those who have broken from the kindred pact, so to speak, would be the Anunnaki. But let's return to the star kindred, because they are at the font of our spiritual experience with light companions, with kindred souls and genetic kindred. And then there are the inner hollow earth kindred. These are a mixture of these star kindred, but mostly they are human beings who are offshoots of original races of this planet, like Lemurians, Atlanteans, Egyptians, many different races and cultures, who have singular portions of them have been allowed into the inner earth. We're talking about the hollow of the earth now, at various times in the many epochs of this experience of planet Earth. And they have united, and they have been guided more directly by the star kindred, because they were more spiritually evolved to begin with than we are at this time, let's face it. And so they have greater guidance from them. So that's the hollow earth kindred. Now, there is a group of them called the Noblest Terranata. Well, they don't call themselves that. Thoth gives these names so I can call them something, right? He comes up with some nice sounding things. So Noblest Terranata. And they are a combination of the star kindred and the inner hollow earth kindred, and they have some specific programs of light they are working with. And I'm only aware of them because our Quantum Logic Interactive Group is operating under it with guidance from them. Then we go to the other side of the fence, and we have the ETs. That's an assortment. Some of them are not so bad. Some of them are just cruising around looking at us. Some of them are quite nice, and they can be helpful at times. And then there are the Greys and Lizzies and all those kinds that are kind of an assortment of creepy crawlies, you might say. And they have different roles and dimensions and all kinds of things, and they're generally here to take advantage of us in one way or another. And then, of course, we have the owl, the One World Legion. Now, the old guard of the owl leaned heavily on their association with the ETs that were willing to do deals with them. The new owl, the new guard, which is largely taken over now, is less inclined to lean on the ET factor. In fact, that's the thing we're going to come about talking here. It's called, their own designer creations. They're breeding their own ETs, so to speak. And these they're referring to, or Thoth is referring to, let's put it that way, as the friendly ones. And I believe that that terminology will be used by the owl at some point, that particular one. The friendly ones, they are already breeding these in secret locations, and they are a combination of, or at this time, they are a combination of the genetics of what some whistleblowers refer to as the tall whites, and yet the actual genetic strain is connected to a far wider universal spectrum in which many very enlightened star kindred have this genetic strain in them, because it is a connected genetic strain to us. So that is why, even though the tall whites on the planet are kind of iffy characters, they do have the same genetic strain. So the owl have taken that strain, the new guard, and created their own copies, so to speak, and they've integrated them with more human genetics. And at this time, they're working with that. They will eventually be creating technology, AI, that will go into these creatures, but not like we think, not nuts and bolts like robots. These AI, artificial intelligent components, let's call it, are plasma-based, and they answer to the host of the creator that created that plasma, which is not God. It's the owl. And yet they integrate into the cellular membrane and become one with it. So it's not like they're going to be, you could cut them open and you'd see, lights flashing inside or anything like that. So it's a combination of all of those. And those are going to be the friendly ones. And the friendly ones are going to be there to serve us in the new cities that will be created for that purpose. Now, my article, you can go to the Substack Owl article, and I'm going to put all the links to everything I'm referring to here that I already have for your referencing in the info box below. But if you go to that article, it will delineate a little more about that. But the friendly ones are the ones that are going to be just so nice to us and offer us a refuge, a place to be. They're really more the hosts. Others will bring us in from the owl. These would be the human ones who began all of this. Then the friendly ones will be the ones that that are our hosts and that tell us how it's going to work and where we're going to go and how we're going to live. And that new thing that's coming out, own nothing and be happy, well, that's what they're going to be saying. And we're going to be so grateful. I say we, the mass consciousness is going to be so grateful to them, because things will get so bad before then that they're going to look very good. And that's their plan. So everybody marches off into these cities that they've been created, and there will be two tiers to them, or several tiers. One with the people with money and the right genetics, sometimes just the right genetics, will have the upper slot, and the others will have the lower slot, and some will be eliminated altogether. Now, this is their plan, okay? It hasn't happened yet. Not in the reality I'm speaking to you at this moment. Parts of it have. We've already seen things that are going on that are, in planning for this, but not that final outcome. And I'm sharing this not to say, oh my God, isn't this horrible? This awful thing is going to happen. No, I'm saying this is what they are planning to happen. But the people that are planning this are human beings, and they're very flawed human beings. They have been planning it for a very, very long time. An old owl or new owl, they're still people. And they have a lot of karma, a lot of bad karma. So that is their Achilles heel. And that is why the conscious collective must, as Thoth has been telling me, fear not, rise up, because we were born to do this, to overcome and to transform and to create the reality we wish to create together within the realm of the full light spectrum, which Thoth calls the Metatron, or metatronic, and leave behind the half-light spectrum that we live in now, the orotronic, which can become so easily violated and fractured. But of course, the owl don't wish us to leave the orotron, because that's their nest. That's where they lay their eggs and raise their young. And they will feed off of our energy, our experience, and even, so they think, off of our light. But they can't touch that. They can't touch that. So instead, those who follow them down that yellow brick road will be dimmed down so that they become simply fodder for that plan. So what can we really do about this? Well, most of us know that the main thing is to maintain heart resonance, spiritual consciousness, take care of our own self, don't try to fix others before we fix ourselves. And yet we're not really trying to fix anybody, not even ourselves. We're simply aligning our desire for spiritual presence, and we're bringing it into the now. And as we do that, we become pillars of light. And that is a transforming modality. The more pillars of light, the more transformation occurs. Even so, our transformation is leading us into a separate space. This is where the great divide takes on more and more meaning. This is where we engage the frequency of the pyramidus radius to a deeper degree. We move on. We create a platform which steadies us and readies us to move from a world system 1 to a world system 2. However, the One World Legion, or whatever we want to call them, in large, do not want that to happen, because they need us, at least for the time being, in one way or another, and they also need to feed off of what we provide them with in regard to reality stability. Because their state of being is extremely chaotic. We think we're chaotic, lots is going on in our lives and we feel very chaotic at times. But I'm speaking about chaotic with a capital C. They build their stability off of our chaos, and yet they also build it off of our stability. So if we remove that from their field, they don't have anything to build upon. Where is our beingness in this unique and stressful time, challenging time, and yet in a way very magical time, because we are on the threshold of creating a new reality together, not some kind of commonality where everybody thinks alike, but one that accepts unique aspects of the greater spiritual beingness we all share. The main thing for us now is to keep our rationale, our core spiritual consciousness. We can get frayed around the edges, but go back to that spiritual place in your being, because right now, all of these things in the outer world are saying, we're going to change your reality. This is the way you're going to think about things now. This is how you're going to be afraid of them and what you're going to be afraid of. And we are controlling the narrative. So it's up to you to say, no, I control my narrative. And I control it through spiritual consciousness, through the conscious collective. Uniquely me, but part of that collective of spirit that defines all human beingness, that is of the light. I wish to conclude with the story of Grace. Grace is a person, and I became aware of her through Thoth about 3 years ago now. She is actually was created in a pod of some kind by the new Order of the Owl. She's one of those beings that is a combination of genetics from the tall whites and human combined and created in a sterile environment. Now, they have the ability to impregnate women with that creation, but they don't do that because they want a sterile environment. They want to make sure, or try to make sure, that these beings are, while very human and are programmed, so to speak, and taught to be very likable, the friendly ones, they are at the same time subservient to their creatress. However, there's a problem here, and it's a sticking point they're aware of, and they're hoping that when they inject the technical part, the AI part, which they haven't done yet, that they will be able to correct this. And that is that if you bring genetic frequencies into life, even if it's in a sterile environment, a soul enters in. A soul enters the body. That's the way it works. So they are trying to kind of override that little problem by programming these people, because even people with souls can certainly be programmed to do negative things, and it was working pretty well for them under this very controlled situation. It's only in its first stages. So the components of light, our helpmates from above, the star Kindred, saw an opportunity that they were allowed to participate in to help us, and that was to put 1 or 2 or 3 souls into these sterile environment bodies that were very enlightened. They were highly developed and spiritually evolved. These were souls, of course, that volunteered for this program. And that's what they did. Just a few. And the main one, you might call her the leader, the name they have given her. I don't know what the owl called her, probably a number or something, but the name they gave her was Grace, and it is appropriate. So Grace and 2 or 3 or 4, I'm not exactly sure, of her companions in light were injected, I don't want to say injected, drawn into the frequency of these bodies in this particular program, in this particular place, so they'd all be together. And they played their roles because it's not an outer program yet. They just, did what they were supposed to do. They grow up very fast, I think, maybe 2-3 years, and they're adults. And all the while maintaining their spiritual consciousness. And then the plan, which succeeded, was to extract Grace and her companions from the owl through a program of the Inner Light Network. And I don't know the particulars of that, and I'm sure they don't want me to know, because, it's not something I should know. And I certainly wouldn't be speaking about it on a video on YouTube if I did know. So anyway, they did this. It's already been done, and she's now in a very safe place with her fellow light comrades. The reason for this was to be able to take those genetics and to be able to bring them into a preferred environment of the Inner Light Network. And these are cooperative souls, highly evolved spiritual souls, who are developing programs with them to counteract some of the genetic liabilities of these friendly ones, the program of that. I really can't speak too freely about it all, and I don't know a whole lot, as I said, but I am permitted to tell you this much, because what is going to be happening here, and I don't know how long it's going to take or any of that, is that Grace and her people are going to be given the viability of creating children, offspring, that will not be created in a sterile environment, but yet will be carefully nurtured in a loving environment. And the souls that enter these beings will be highly evolved. So this is a new race, a new species of light beings that will be able to integrate more fully with us on the surface of this planet, because they are born on the surface of this planet. Remember, I say remember for those of you who are familiar with my work, that the soul of Thoth first came to this world as Thoth Muzurut. He came in a light ship, landed in Atlantis, and there he was, and he did his thing, and then he left. But he didn't really leave, because his soul desired to, incarnate on this planet. So he had human incarnated genetics here, highly star involved. He had a lot of star race in him, but he was a human being for the time. He was a master and illumined one. He was solar born, all of that, but still human for the time. That was the human. And he did that so he could embed that frequency into this planet. He wasn't just coming here in this whole other form and then leaving again. I give that as an example. So Grace and her companions, this is what they are doing. And they agreed to do it before they entered these bodies, these created bodies in the light pods or whatever. I shouldn't call them light pods, in these sterile pods. And now they have been rescued and are in a program where they are being helped to do what they agreed to do. Now, I don't know any more about it, as I said, but I've been not only given permission, Thoth has encouraged me to speak to you about this now, because, I feel that I have a kindredship with Grace somehow. I don't know, this could be totally a psychological thing on my part, but I just feel like I kind of know her, or she's speaking to me unconsciously, or something like that. This is my impression. And I feel her soul. Sometimes I think she's showing me things. She showed me a little cuddly, like, stuffed unicorn, and I'm going, what is that about? And then something happened later to verify what that meant. I'm not going to go into that. I can't even remember it all, to tell you the truth. But at the time I went, oh, okay. I understand what she was showing me, why she was showing me that. So I'm just saying that I'm feeling that more and more of us are going to start feeling these beings as they propagate. And they can propagate rather quickly. Not going to be hordes of them or anything, but the ones that are coming through. And they need from us our humanity. That is, they're not trying to take anything, not at all. They're spiritually coming to us with hat in hand, with open arms, with hearts open to us, and saying, teach us certain things that we need to be able to integrate into your loving kindness, into the perspective of how humanity issues forth loving kindness, loving being. Because, someone like Thoth, an illumined being, or even the star kindred, they're all incredibly loving beings. But they're different. They have a different, higher perspective of it all. Humanity is kind of warm and fuzzy, and, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as we reach out beyond that and experience more, it's a nice place to be. We're all huggy and kissy and when we're in our love space, and we love to cuddle little kitties, and there's nothing wrong with that. And even Thoth, I've seen him, with his animals and petting them and loving them, but it's different. It's just different. It's not really better. It's just more expanded. So what these ones, and I probably should get a name for them so I can understand what they are. Thoth, give me a name to call them. But they are, wanting to access that part of our beautiful, loving being, how we experience it in a very personal, up-close way, because they wish to incorporate that into their homogeny. Now, the friendly ones are attempting to not duplicate it, but pantomime it, because they're incapable of really experiencing it. Remember, they're programmed entirely for the purpose that they were created. They're not evil beings. They're just, hosts of a particular agenda. Very much like the little gray ETs that have been created very similar ways to propagate the agenda of their hosts, largely which we do never see. We do never see. I'm inventing my own language here. So, back to all of this. What they're wishing me, the light kindred, are wishing me to express to you, that you might find grace in her companions reaching out to you in dream state or in meditation in a very gentle, non-intrusive way, to touch into the field with your permission and sense what your loving kindness, what your feeling of love is about, and how you express it, so that they can more fully develop that personable way that humanity expresses love. An update: Thoth is calling these earth-engendered light beings, grace in her kind. He's calling them the Gaias, spelled G-A-I-Y-A-S. For those of you following my videos, you might be familiar with the Nuastra, which are very similar human star kindred mix that are in the highest level of the Pyramidus Radius matrix frequency. And they are there as hosts to work with the souls who are in that field as that happens, as we become closer and closer to the highest tier in the Pyramidus Radius, the platform that prepares us for moving from a world system 1 to a world system 2. That platform, the Nuastra, are very similar human star kindred beings as the Gaias. However, there is a prime difference, and that is, first of all, the Gaias would never have been developed spiritually, heart-centered consciously, had it not been for this nefarious owl program. The Gaias are the offset of that, and they dwell in this reality here, not in the slightly removed dimension of the higher Pyramidus Radius. So their job is different entirely than the hosts, the Nuastra. So I just wanted to clarify that. We have a lot of different sets of beings here that we're working with, and I'm attempting to help you understand them without getting too confusing. But the Gaias are key to helping us mitigate this onslaught of AI hybrid mixture beings that are being developed by the owl. And how do they do that? Well, it's not just procreating them and establishing them in various levels of service for us in this reality here. It is more than that, because actually all of these beings created by the owl, they've done so in a particularly genetic way that they're all kind of linked together. Now, they aren't a hive mind, but one can affect the other. So the highly evolved souls that entered the Gaias, that created Grace and her companions, those beings have broken free from the setup, so to speak, but they are still connected to the system, although they are not responsive to that system because they've risen above it and there are other factors involved. So they can influence it more positively. They are the highest frequency. The other ones that are in this program, the friendly ones, are the lower frequency. And it's not because the souls in these bodies are bad. It's just that they've been, like a lot of people on the planet, dumbed down, and they have been specifically programmed from inception to do what they're told. So the Gaias, who are not that way, are able to influence them from a distance because of the genetic frequency they share. So I just wanted to give you an understanding of their true purpose. Because the tall white genetics was used to create the friendlies, and now of course the Gaias as well, they come from the same thing. They're all white. You know, that they're very blonde, blue-eyed, and white at this time. Both groups intend to create other races from that strain for very different reasons that would be obvious to you. With the friendlies, it would be to, you know, ingratiate people and make them feel, okay, you know, I feel that I'm included, but for very nefarious reasons. And of course, with the Gaias, it's because this is the natural way of the world, and there are many different races and expressions of God's spirit in humanity. So see, from two very different angles, they intend to create racial differences. But they haven't gotten there yet. This is a very new program all the way around. To change the subject, I really wish to add one more thing here, and this is that it's important to understand that when we move from a world system 1 to a world system 2, and this planet literally disintegrates in that process, from the electromagnetic field being flashed into another dimension, the outer shell of this planet and everything's just going to go. And it's part of a natural process. There's not aliens doing this to us, or certainly the Star Kindred aren't. But as that occurs, I used to think, well, that's it. All the souls that chose not to go will be electrocuted at that point, well, actually before that point, and they'll have to, you know, in the body, and they'll have to move on to other worlds that will accept that frequency that they're in to try to, you know, work it out and develop a higher frequency in their being. This is just pure science. It's not some, you know, dictate of any kind. They have made the choice. And that's true. However, there's something that Thoth calls the phantom field. And the phantom field, just like if you cut an arm off, sometimes a person still feels their arm there, a phantom arm. There will be a phantom timeline that will still exist for a while. And souls will think they're embodied in that timeline. Well, they kind of are. It's difficult to to pinpoint what is and isn't, you know, to be or not to be, the whole theme of this. So they're there, let's say, in this phantom zone, and they're creating this reality, and they're going to go on their little path with all these things that are, you know, in the plans for the owl, and they'll be so successful because they're in their own phantom world to be able to do that. So that's something a little difficult for us to put our brains around, but I add it because when people say, oh, well, I spoke to this being from the future, and he says we're all robots and all of this horrible stuff is going on, well, that's coming from this phantom track. And it's not an illusion. It is simply a phantom that is still lingering in the ethers, you might say. Again, I've placed links before this video to related videos and articles. I encourage you to place your thoughts and feelings in the commentaries below. And I wish to thank you for listening to me, for taking this journey with Thoth and I into the future.